I never thought a single conversation could change the trajectory of my entire life. But here I am, sitting on the edge of my bed, stomach swollen with our first baby, staring at my phone as another message from Levi flashes across the screen. The words are cruel, spiteful, meant to cut, and yet I can barely read them without my chest tightening. The last 10 years of my life, every laugh, every dream, every plan suddenly feels fragile, like glass in my hands, ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. When I first met Levi, he was everything I thought I wanted. We were young, passionate, full of ambition, and naive enough to believe that love could conquer everything. I had just graduated and moved back to his hometown on the West Coast, leaving behind the sprawling streets and familiar skyline of my Midwest city. I loved that city, but the thought of starting a life with him made the move feel exciting, even thrilling. We found a cozy apartment, painted the walls together, picked out furniture, and slowly started carving a life that felt ours alone. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. For 5 years, we were married, and before that, we'd been together for 5 more. That's a decade of intertwined lives, and I truly believed we were happy. We talked about our future constantly, weekend trips, our dream home, our baby. When we planned for our child, it felt like the final piece of a beautiful puzzle. I imagined decorating the nursery, feeling the baby kick, watching Levi read bedtime stories. I pictured family holidays and quiet Sunday mornings filled with laughter. And then, in a single, shocking evening, all of that was ripped away. It started as a casual conversation that turned into a nightmare. Levi looked at me across the dinner table, calm, almost detached, and said he wanted a divorce. He claimed he didn't want to be tied down anymore, that he was still young and needed to live his life. I remember laughing nervously, thinking he was joking, because we had always joked about these absurd what-if scenarios. But he wasn't joking. His words cut through me like a knife. "There's nobody else," he said, and I wanted to believe him, but my gut twisted anyway. A week later, rumors, glimpses, and finally, undeniable proof, told me he was seeing someone. The betrayal was a cold, hard fact, pressing on my chest as I tried to breathe. At first, I couldn't even think straight. The house we bought together suddenly felt hostile. Levi wanted me to move out, but this was my home too. I had put down a down payment, fought for this place, built memories here. Instead, he began staying with his friend Louis, leaving me alone in the house that was supposed to be our sanctuary. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my body aching from pregnancy and my mind screaming, trying to figure out where I went wrong, what I could have done differently, what this meant for me, for the baby, for the life I had imagined. And then there were the messages. Levi's family, once warm and kind, now cold and accusing. Friends, some who had been close for years, suddenly taking sides without knowing the full story. Each notification felt like a hammer, each call like a judgment. "You're keeping Levi from his baby. How could you do this? You're selfish." They didn't understand that the decision to leave wasn't easy or vindictive, it was survival. For me and my unborn child. But I couldn't explain that to everyone. And the constant bombardment made it feel impossible to breathe. The emotional weight was staggering. I would sit in the living room, belly swollen, staring at the empty walls we had painted together, and feel both fear and rage coiling inside me. Fear, because I was about to become a single mother in a city that was expensive, unfamiliar, and devoid of my family's support. Rage, because Levi had taken what was supposed to be a shared dream and shattered it, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Nights were the worst when the world was silent, and all I had were my thoughts and the baby kicking inside me, reminding me that life goes on even when your world collapses. Financially, I was capable, I had a good job, and in theory, I could manage on my own. But managing and living were two different things. San Diego is expensive, more than I had anticipated even before the divorce announcement. The thought of trying to maintain the life I wanted, with a baby on the way, without my support network, made the apartment feel like a gilded cage. Sure, I could make it work, but the cost would be isolation, exhaustion, and the constant anxiety of being a single parent with no backup. The house that once represented stability now felt like a trap, and every message from Levi or his allies felt like a reminder that my life, my dreams, were no longer mine to protect. The decision to move back home wasn't made lightly. I weighed it, considered every alternative, calculated every consequence, and ultimately it came down to one truth. I needed my family. My parents may be divorced, bitter, and at odds with each other, but in this situation, they were united in support of me. They arranged a rental, covered expenses, and made it clear that I was not alone. Their generosity was overwhelming and humbling, but also a relief, a lifeline I desperately needed. Moving home meant safety, stability, and a chance to breathe. Even amid the chaos of an unraveling marriage, Levi, of course, reacted with fury. He painted my move as strategic, a ploy to control custody and keep him away. His words to mutual friends and family echoed in my mind. She moved back to get the upper hand, but the truth was far simpler and far harder. I moved because I needed to survive, to protect myself and our baby. It was true that moving home put me in a stronger position for custody and child support, but that wasn't the motivation. It was an inevitability of trying to protect my child. And yet, no one seemed to hear that, because anger, bitterness, and betrayal clouded every conversation. I remember the first few days after telling Levi I was moving. He was incredulous, shaking his head, refusing to listen. He demanded I make up my mind. Would he be a father or not? I told him, calmly, that he would be a father regardless. I told him that he could choose to be present or absent, but that our baby was coming, and he had responsibilities, emotional, legal, financial. Every word was met with denial, accusations, and threats, and every night, as I sat alone, exhausted from work and pregnancy, I replayed those conversations, wondering if anyone would ever understand the depth of my struggle or the love and fear that motivated my decisions. And through all this, the baby moved inside me, a constant reminder of hope amidst heartbreak. I clung to that life, that innocence, that potential. The messages from Levi and his allies still came, but each time I felt the baby kick, I was reminded why I was making these impossible decisions. This tiny life depended on me now, and even when the world seemed to oppose me, I couldn't falter. I had to be strong, for both of us. It wasn't just the messages or the divorce, it was the betrayal, the disbelief, the way people I loved and trusted seemed to turn against me without reason. It was the fear of raising a child in a world that suddenly felt hostile. It was the isolation, the sleepless nights, the uncertainty of the future. And yet, even in the darkness, there was a faint, persistent light, the unwavering support of my family, the strength I didn't know I had, and the quiet determination that I would survive this, and my child would thrive. I didn't ask for this path. I didn't plan for the love of my life to abandon me, or for my friends to judge me without knowing the whole story. But I learned quickly that life doesn't wait for us to be ready. Life pushes, and we either fall or rise. I chose to rise. Every message from Levi, every cold call from someone convinced I was the villain, was a test of my resilience. And I would endure, not just for myself, but for the baby I carried, and the life I was determined to build. Even now, as I sit here and let the tears come, I remind myself of the truth I cling to. I am not selfish. I am not cruel. I am not keeping anyone from anyone. I am choosing life, stability, and love in the face of chaos. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. The move back home felt like stepping into both relief and guilt simultaneously. Relief, because for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without the crushing weight of San Diego's skyline reminding me of what I had lost. Relief, because my parents had rallied in ways I never expected, their support fierce and unwavering. And guilt, because Levi's accusations hung in the air like storm clouds, accusing me of manipulation, selfishness, and deceit. I knew I had made the right decision for myself and my baby, but that didn't stop the ache of judgment from following me. From the moment I arrived, my parents enveloped me in warmth and reassurance. Their divorce, which had been a source of tension and awkwardness for years, became irrelevant as they focused entirely on helping me. My mum, balancing her impending retirement with a renewed purpose, took charge of finding a comfortable rental home that would be safe and affordable. My dad, surprisingly coordinated with her in this situation, ensured that everything from moving logistics to finances was taken care of. They insisted I focus on preparing for the baby and my own mental health. I tried to argue, tried to insist I could manage alone, but they wouldn't hear it. Their determination to protect me and the baby overrode any pretense of independence I might have clung to. Settling into my new space was surreal. It was smaller than our San Diego apartment, but cozier, more manageable, and imbued with a sense of safety I hadn't felt in weeks. I unpacked slowly, taking my time to place each item, each memento, carefully, almost ceremonially. The nursery, once a distant dream in my mind, began to take shape. Soft pastels, gentle lighting, and tiny pieces of furniture that made my heart ache with anticipation filled the room. Each small act of preparation felt like reclaiming a piece of my life that had been overshadowed by betrayal and fear. The first week was the hardest. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from people I had once considered friends, and Levi's texts were relentless. "You're keeping me from my child," he typed. "I can't believe you're doing this." I read them over and over, the words biting, but I refused to respond in the heat of emotion. Each time I considered picking up the phone, my fingers froze. I didn't want to escalate, didn't want to feed into the narrative he had constructed. I realized early on that no amount of explanation would satisfy him or his allies, so I chose silence as my armor. Work became both a refuge and a reminder of normalcy. Luckily, my company had a location in my hometown, so I was able to transfer without losing my position or income. Walking into the office on the first day, I felt a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. Colleagues greeted me warmly, curious about the move, and I smiled, carefully curating my answers to avoid the personal details that might invite sympathy or judgment. The familiar rhythms of work, the meetings, the emails, the small victories helped me regain a sense of control, a reminder that life continued even when personal chaos threatened to overwhelm. Even as I settled into routines, my parents' support remained unwavering. They covered the rental, insisting I save every possible dollar for my future home. They paid for my divorce lawyer, making sure I could navigate legal complexities without the added stress of financial strain. They accompanied me to doctor's appointments, offered guidance, and reminded me constantly that I was doing the right thing for my baby. My mum even started talking about childcare options for when I returned to work after maternity leave. A discussion that both warmed my heart and made the reality of impending motherhood feel more tangible. But the shadow of Levi loomed large. He could not accept that I had acted out of necessity rather than malice. His words, fueled by frustration and denial, painted me as the villain in a story where I was merely a woman trying to survive and protect her unborn child. Friends who had once been close suddenly echoed his sentiments, calling and texting accusations, each one like a fresh wound. "You're keeping Levi from his baby. This isn't fair to him. Why would you do this?" I read them, reread them, and sometimes, late at night, I cried, not from guilt, but from exhaustion, emotional, physical, and mental. Pregnancy had already stretched me to my limits, and navigating these constant judgments only intensified the strain. I learned quickly that boundaries were not optional, they were necessary. I stopped responding to messages that were cruel or accusatory, choosing instead to focus on the support I did have. I leaned heavily on my parents, whose wisdom and presence became a lifeline. We laughed, cried, and strategized together. I began to understand that moving back home was not a retreat or a surrender. It was an act of preservation, a way to secure a foundation strong enough for both me and my child. In those first weeks, I also started building a network of local support. Friends from my hometown, people who had known me long before Levi and I met, reached out. Their offers of help ranged from practical assistance, helping with nursery setup, doctor visits, grocery runs to emotional support, simply listening and validating my feelings without judgment. I began to feel a sense of community again. A stark contrast to the isolation I had felt in San Diego, where friends and family were distant, and Levi's presence dominated every interaction. Financial independence, though not a struggle in terms of income, became an empowering aspect of my move. The pressure of managing high rent and living costs alone in San Diego had been overwhelming. Here, with the support of my parents and a more reasonable cost of living, I could breathe again. Budgeting, planning, and preparing for the baby became an exercise in autonomy and foresight. I could envision a future that, while uncertain in many ways, felt attainable and safe. Sleep, however, was still elusive. Even in the comfort of my parents' home and a new environment, I woke frequently, heart racing from dreams of confrontation, betrayal, and fear. I imagined Levi standing at the door, angry and demanding, and sometimes the anxiety was so vivid it left me trembling. But each morning, I reminded myself why I had moved to the safety of my child, the stability of my home, and the unwavering support of family who loved me unconditionally. I clung to those truths like a lifeline, each day a small victory against the storm that had upended my life. Through it all, I discovered a surprising resilience within myself. The weight of betrayal, isolation, and uncertainty could have broken me. Yet each step I took, each call I ignored, each decision I made for the baby, each plan laid for the future enforced my strength. I realized that the life I wanted was still possible, even if it looked different from the one I had imagined. And in that realization, there was hope, quiet but persistent, pushing me forward as the weeks passed. I began to see the move, not as a loss, but as a necessary transition. San Diego had been our life together, but this place, this support, this foundation was the beginning of my life with my child. It was where I would reclaim my narrative, redefine my independence, and prepare to embrace motherhood fully, unshadowed by the chaos Levi had brought. And though the messages, the calls, and the accusations continued, they no longer held the same power over me. I had chosen my path, and I would walk it with resolve, protecting both myself and the life growing inside me. Levi's fury was immediate and palpable the moment I settled into my new life. He refused to see the reality I had faced, the impossible circumstances that had led me to move back home. To him, it was a betrayal, a calculated maneuver to cut him out of our baby's life. I tried to explain, calmly, that this wasn't about revenge or manipulation, that I simply couldn't afford to raise our child in San Diego alone. But his perception was clouded with anger and wounded pride. Every conversation, every text, every phone call became a battleground. Friends and family who once supported me now became vectors of his narrative. They called, they texted, they questioned my motives, all echoing Levi's claims. "You're keeping him from his baby." I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and indignation. How could they not see the truth? I wasn't trying to take anything from Levi, nor was I trying to control him. I was trying to survive, to protect our child, and to create a stable environment for the life growing inside me. And yet, here I was, feeling like a criminal in my own story. Legal matters became a looming specter. My parents had graciously taken on the financial burden of hiring a divorce lawyer, a gesture that both relieved and humbled me. Preparing for court, understanding custody rights, and considering child support all became part of my daily reality. The thought of Levi contesting everything, of turning friends and family against me further, gnawed at the edges of my resolve. I spent long nights reviewing documents, asking questions, and trying to anticipate every possible argument he might present. Knowledge, I realized, was another form of power. I couldn't control his behavior, but I could control my preparation. The conversations with Levi were the hardest. He oscillated between pleading, rage, and manipulation, each tactic designed to guilt me into returning or to fracture my resolve. "You're punishing me," he would say. "You're trying to control our baby." I stayed firm. "Our baby is coming, Levi. You will be a father. You will have a role, but I will not compromise the safety and stability of my child for anyone else's anger or pride." These words, though simple, became my mantra. A reminder that my authority as a mother was non-negotiable. Social interactions with mutual friends became fraught with tension. Some had always been neutral, willing to hear both sides, but even they struggled to separate Levi's version of events from the reality I lived. Others, influenced entirely by his narrative, treated me with suspicion or hostility. Every dinner invitation, every casual conversation became a potential confrontation. I learned to navigate carefully, to assert boundaries without escalating conflict, and to remind myself that my priority was not their approval, it was the well-being of my child. Even as the external pressure mounted, there was an internal reckoning. I wrestled with guilt and doubt, questions that nagged at me late at night. Was I being selfish? Was I truly protecting my baby, or merely seeking comfort? Did moving back really put me in a position of strength, or had I inadvertently set the stage for a protracted battle? These were not questions with simple answers. They required honesty, courage, and a willingness to accept the discomfort of uncertainty. Each time I doubted myself, I reminded myself of the constance, the support of my parents, the safety of my home, and the life growing inside me. The practicalities of impending motherhood also forced me to confront reality. Appointments, prenatal care, preparing for delivery, and nesting all demanded my attention. Each kick, each movement, each sign of life reminded me that my choices were about more than me. They were about creating the best possible start for my child. While Levi's anger raged like a storm outside my door, I focused on what I could control: my health, my environment, and my readiness to embrace motherhood fully. Child support and custody discussions loomed large. Levi's insistence that I was making a move purely for leverage complicated every interaction. I explained patiently, repeatedly, that my decision was based on necessity and practicality. If he wanted to remain involved, he could, but it would require him to engage responsibly, not blame, manipulate, or retreat. I outlined clearly that child support was a legal and moral responsibility, not a weapon. Every conversation felt like walking a tightrope, balancing firmness with patience, clarity with compassion, and love with resolve. Despite the external chaos, I found moments of clarity and even joy. My parents' home became a sanctuary, a place where I could envision the future rather than be haunted by the past. Decorating the nursery, setting up the crib, and feeling the baby's presence in ways that were intimate and personal reminded me why I had chosen this path. I celebrated small victories: the first successful call to Levi without argument, the completion of a difficult legal form, a productive day at work, all of which reinforced that progress, however incremental, was possible. The hardest moments, though, were the confrontations with those who had once been close. Friends who took sides based on hearsay, acquaintances who assumed the worst, and even family who questioned my motives all tested my patience and resilience. I realized that explaining myself endlessly would not always yield understanding. Sometimes silence and consistent, principled action were more powerful than words. Showing up for my baby, prioritizing safety and stability, and refusing to be manipulated became my statement to the world. There were also moments of unexpected strength. I discovered resilience I didn't know I had, a capacity to manage stress, emotion, and responsibility simultaneously. I learned to advocate fiercely for my needs, to establish boundaries with those who sought to undermine me, and to recognize that self-preservation was not selfishness, was essential. Each day, as my body changed and my child grew, I became more confident in my role as both mother and individual. In time, the narrative began to shift slightly. Some friends began to understand the depth of my decision, recognizing that moving home was not about control, but survival and protection. Levi, predictably, remained stubborn, but even he had to confront the undeniable truth that he could not force me into a situation that endangered my well-being or that of our child. Slowly, boundaries solidified. Communication with him became transactional, focused on logistics, legal responsibilities, and the needs of our baby rather than emotion or guilt. Through all of this, I realized that motherhood was teaching me more than I had ever anticipated. It demanded courage, decisiveness, and the willingness to face judgment, isolation, and adversity. It reminded me that love is not always gentle or easy. Sometimes it requires standing firm against a tide of misunderstanding and criticism. And perhaps most importantly, it revealed that the life I envisioned, though altered and complicated, was still mine to shape, guided by resilience, support, and unwavering commitment to my child. As I prepare for the birth, I am no longer overwhelmed by fear, though caution remains. I am armed with clarity, legal support, family backing, and a strengthened sense of self. Levi's accusations, the messages from friends, and the tension that once seemed unbearable have been reframed as obstacles to navigate rather than chains to bind me. I can move forward, knowing that the choices I've made are rooted in love, protection, and practicality. My child will arrive into a life of care, stability, and intention, a life built from the ashes of betrayal, yes, but also from resilience, foresight, and hope. And so, I continue. Each day brings new challenges, new fears, and new affirmations of strength. Each step is a testament to the necessity of boundaries, the power of family, and the unwavering commitment to protecting what truly matters. Levi may rage, friends may question, and strangers may judge, but the life I am creating for my baby and myself is unwavering, steadfast, and filled with love. This is my reality, my choice, and my path forward, a journey that begins in chaos but moves toward hope, stability, and the unshakable bond between a mother and her child.